like the title of the video says, I'm going to be talking about defense in Warframe. Now, this is going to be part of a more rant rave kind of thing, so the format's going to be kind of loosey-goosey, and I'm going to be talking from my heart. There's definitely numbers to back me up. I'm not going to try to crunch a bunch of numbers and force a bunch of facts down your head. I'm just going to try to give you guys the basics and, give you my opinions on what I think is wrong with defenses in Warframe. I have a lot of things that I kind of want to do in this kind of series where I just talk about general mechanics of the game and things like that. But in general, yeah, it's going to be a little bit different than my normal format of, this is exactly what this does, and this is the true mechanics behind whatever. This is going to be a much more holistic approach. So let's go ahead and get into it. Defenses in Warframe, what are they? Well, I'm not going to be talking about ability based for the most part. I'm not going to be talking about like Null Star giving damage reduction or things like that, or the fact that Baruch can dodge. That's not what we're really here for. I'm also not going to be generally talking from the point of view of an Inaris or a Hildren. For the differences between these three setups. I will have a very specific example of the differences between a very specific weakness, and I'm going to be using Inaris and Hildren for those, but that'll be more towards the end of the video. But I would like to in general have the point of view for this to be between average stats. So a frame that has 200 armor, 300 life, 300 shields, and like 200 energy. Something like Vauban is very average in this way. I think it's really important when you're talking about defenses to talk about it as an average frame, because we already know how you're going to build an Aros. You're going to build them life armor. We already know how you're going to build Hildren. You're going to build her shields. That's just kind of baked into her kit, so it's not really super helpful to talk about it from that perspective. So we're actually going to talk about it from the perspective of an average frame. So let's talk about life and armor real quick. So in a recent patch, they changed it so that life, or Tenno flesh, I should say, and Tenno armor no longer scale differently against incoming damage types. So that means corrosive isn't necessarily better or worse, heat isn't better or worse when hitting Tenno flesh and armor. They also changed it so that Tenno shields take 25% less damage from everything except for toxin and true. So true damage still does do true damage, and it ignores armor, and it doesn't have any mitigation against Tenno shields. But we can very easily start to see when we look at some of the modding options that life armor is quite a bit better than the other options. So when we compare mod setups, just look at what you can do with life mods. There's a lot more life mods. All of the Heart of Demos set mods are life armor. I don't even understand that, because I thought with the addition of evasion, they would actually go for shield, so you could try to do some dodging and reset your shield. Recharge, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me why they would do that, other than they're just super biased towards life armor. I don't like that. I like having actual options when I set stuff up. But not only are there just a plethora of more options for life and armor, and this also includes arcanes and things of that nature, not necessarily just mods. There's a lot of mods that are arcanes that give you armor, and not a whole lot that give you extra energy. But in addition to this, you have the Umbral set. The Umbral set allows you to scale your life and armor at a much, much higher rate than other mod configurations. So basically just putting 2 mods on allows you to get a lot more life than you're going to be able to get out of a single or even 2 other things. So in addition to that, and you're going to hear me saying in addition to that a lot when we're talking about life and armor scale multiplicatively with each other. More armor makes your life more effective, more life makes your armor more effective. Shield based builds don't really have this. In general, you just have how much shields you have, and to a lesser degree you have your shield recharge, which you can try to build around a little bit, but it's fairly inconsistent and it's not super reliable in a lot of situations. So life and armor also have certain other weaknesses. So we can see very clearly that the damage types are no longer a weakness for armor. This is a huge buff to armor so that you don't actually have weaknesses, but you do have a lot of status effects that affect you as an armor setup. So obviously the bleed status effect will hurt you. Now, the bleed status effect bypasses armor. They changed it so that it no longer bypasses shields. That's a huge bonus to shield-based builds, and you're not going to get one-shot randomly by Slash and Toxin. It'll just be Toxin. Now, that being said, I think that that this is probably the strongest weakness, or the most powerful weakness against a life-based build is this bleed status effect, but keep in mind that the slash damage type no longer has a bonus versus flesh, and it's going to get reduced just like everything else anyway. So if you have, you know, a 900 armor build, you're going to be reducing the damage by 75%. Keep in mind as well the damage reduction formula for armor. We're going to be talking about that a bit more when we get to shields. So the slash damage type isn't actually dangerous, it's just the bleed effect. True damage is obviously true damage. We're not even going to really talk about that because it is what it is. Heat status effect. This will strip our armor over 6 seconds, and it does apply a dot. Now, the armor strip is somewhat powerful, and the dot is somewhat powerful. However, you have a very long time to interact or react to a heat proc happening. It is a scaled up type of effect, so it starts out very, very weak and it grows into its power. So don't expect a heat proc to just one shot you randomly. You're gonna know at which point it's gonna start really hurting. So it's gonna give you a lot of time to react. 6 seconds is a long time, and I would say 3 seconds is where you want to start reacting, and that's obviously still a long time too. And then we also have corrosive. Corrosive reduces our armor. This is not a big, it's not a big deal. It's getting a status of corrosive does hurt you. But considering that we don't actually have damage type weaknesses anymore, the corrosive status effect is basically equivalent to us having to deal with puncture and corrosive damage as a flat damage type before. So this is a weakness, but it's nowhere near not even the base effect we had to deal with before as an armor-based setup. And then finally you have Viral. Viral does double the damage you take as a health armor build. However, Viral feels to me, and I could be wrong, and if you guys encounter it all the time, let me know, but I very rarely get Viral procced. It's not a big deal to me. So yeah, it's pretty rare to me, I guess. So there's a lot of mitigating factors when we talk about these weaknesses. So let's go ahead and jump over into a quick thinking setup. So quick thinking is what uses energy to transform into life. So whenever you get down to 2 health as a quick thinking build, you will start consuming your energy instead of your life to take damage. Now you do this at an increased efficiency. So you would take 240% efficiency. You basically say 1 divided by 240, or 2.4 I should say, and that's going to give you about 42% damage taken, which is equivalent to 60% damage reduction. Funnily enough, if you take 200 armor frame and you give them a steel fiber, this is going to be very, very similar damage reduction. So what does a quick thinking build really do for you? Well, it gives you an extra layer of damage reduction, and it is multiplicative. This is very, very powerful. Effectively, you're just going to take 60% less damage from everything. That is huge. It works with pretty much every single damage type. It works with every single status effect, etc., etc. So it is going to be very, very nice to have that extra layer of defense. Now, that being said, that's really the only thing quick thinking gives you, but it has a plethora of weaknesses. So as you are an energy-based build now, you're pretty much gonna have to take primed flow, or at least flow, so you can increase that energy pool. Now, the reason why you have to take these is because in general you're going to need to have a pool so that if you cast an ability or you take some damage, you're not going to be immediately out of energy. Now, in addition to that, you're going to have some added weaknesses. So not only do you have to use your very life to cast abilities, you're going to be very, very susceptible to Eximuses. They're going to drain your life now because you use your energy for life. In addition, the magnetic proc drains 50 energy per second when it is on you. This is going to be incredibly dangerous as an energy-based build. And then I believe finally the weakness is that whenever you take a large amount of damage with a quick thinking setup, you will be flinched. I think these are very, very harsh penalties for quick thinking. The 60% damage reduction is very nice, but I don't believe that it is worth all of those weaknesses. Now, I'm going to reserve how I'm going to change everything for the very end of the video, so if you want to see those, probably go ahead and skip forward. But let's go ahead and jump into the final damage type, and that is going to be shields, or defense type, I should say, and that's going to be shields. So, shields. Shields are kind of the worst of every world. You don't have the ability to scale with armor. Armor scaling is really good for energy-based setups and for life-based setups, but it doesn't do anything for a shield-based setup. Now, what can you scale with? Effectively, you can scale with max shields, and you can scale with recharge speed. Basically, that's it. Now, there are some arcanes that let you regenerate life, they let you regenerate energy, they let you regenerate shields and things like that. I'm not really going to be talking about those so much, because if you're depending on arcanes for survival, it's probably going to be at very high levels of content, and the weaknesses that certain types of defenses have don't actually change. So it doesn't matter that you're running Arcane Grace versus something else. The weaknesses are going to be the weaknesses of that type of defense, regardless if you're using Arcanes or not. And we can talk about that a bit when we go into Toxin damage. So, in addition, we got a 25% damage reduction for shields. What does this equate to for armor setup, because we don't get to use armor? Well, basically, that's 100 armor. If we look at the formula for armor, it's 300 divided by 300 plus whatever your armor is. In order to get a 25% damage reduction, it's going to be 100 armor. This is nothing. It's very, very small. And it also, I don't like the way it was implemented. It's very arbitrary. They just gave us 25%. I would much rather see it at least be based on our base amount of armor. Something that actually makes sense. And maybe you could put it on like a Valkyrie. I don't know. But it's just so random at a 25% damage reduction. I don't think they should have added it. I would have rather seen a lot different of a change. Maybe make it to where shields scale in, in value better. Like instead of the mod being 440%, make it 880%. So shields are just bigger, or maybe make it scale off of final amount of shields instead of base amount of shields. This is somewhat like a Path of Exile approach, where energy shield builds were just way bigger health pools than their life counterparts, but they didn't have as many layers of damage reduction. I think that's like a really interesting and healthy way to put it, and it does give some more, it would give some more clout to a shield based setup, where it's like, oh, look at me, I've got 18,000 shields. I think it could be really interesting in that way. Whereas life-based builds are obviously much lower, but they have 80% armor reduction and stuff like that. So now that we've kind of talked about the armor problem with shields, let's talk about the status problem and the damage type problem with shields. So they did remove all the damage type weaknesses. This is included for shields as well, so cold damage and things like that aren't our weakness anymore. Even magnetic damage doesn't do bonus damage to our shields. However, toxin damage does outright penetrate our shields. This is, in comparison to slash damage for a life-based or an energy-based setup, very ridiculously overpowered. So slash damage has no bonus against an armor setup. Only the status effect does. Only bleeds do. For a shield-based setup, not only does the poison status effect affect us, just the same as a life-based setup, but the actual toxin damage itself ignores all of our defenses. This is bad in a lot of ways. One of those ways is the fact that adaptation would allow an armor-based setup to take 10 shots to the face of slashing type damage and build up a resistance so that eventually when a slash proc occurred, a bleed occurred, he would have 90% resistance versus that damage effect, that damaging effect. For a toxin setup, that's usually not going to happen, because if you ever had a dot from poison that was going to kill you, the base damage that caused it already killed you. You're already dead. So you don't have the ability to adapt, use adaptation against toxin damage as a shield setup. I think that's a really unfair way to do it, and I think they should change. I said I was going to do the change stuff at the end. I'm going to wait till the end. I got to stop myself. I've stopped myself like 3 times so far. Keep in mind, guys, these are ranting and ravings. These aren't super formulaic. I didn't write a script for this or anything, but suffice it to say, it's really unfair how Toxin is treated in comparison to how slash damage is treated for armor setups. In addition to this, the poison status effect is still very, very effective against a shield setup. And then we don't have as many weaknesses as a life armor based setup. We don't have as many. So life armor, you know, had heat, it had the slash status effect, it had the heat status effect, corrosive status effect, it had the viral status effect. It has a lot of things that could go wrong with it. And then we saw with quick thinking, the magnetic status effect really hurt quick thinking much more disproportionately from other setups. And then we have with shields, magnetic setup basically makes us take double damage versus our shields. Now, magnetic damage is a lot more prolific. It's just out there a lot more than viral damage in my personal anecdotal playtime. I don't see viral nearly as much as I see magnetic, and I think that's just because of how corpus work in general. So I'm going to end up seeing my weakness as a shield-based build with both infested, very commonly with toxin, and magnetic with our corpus. So 2 of the factions just straight up kind of counter you in a very meaningful way. And whereas viral would be very, very dangerous, I don't see it that much, and it isn't usually an issue for me. But magnetic I see very often as a shield-based build. So our few weaknesses that we do have with a shield-based build are not only very common, but they're very deadly. They're very, very deadly. We don't have a lot of ways to mitigate it as a shield-based build because we can't adapt to the damage from adaptation, and we don't have a big health pool to even deal with it. And this is something that we kind of talk about with Slash and Toxin. Even if we have our worst weakness as a life armor based setup, and that is we have a bleed effect on us, that only removes half of our defenses. We've still scaled our life up, right? We scaled our armor and our life. We've still scaled our life up, so our health pool is like, you know, 1,000. If you have an umbral setup, that's like 1,000, right? You have 1,000 life. If you have a shield setup, you have 300 life, or even less if you're like on Hildren, you have 225. A toxin damage is just gonna kill you, like instantaneously. So in the worst case scenarios, a life armor build is way better off than the worst case scenario for a shield build. And I'm not even going to go into arcanes and things like that. There are some abilities that allow you to ignore certain things, like on Hildren, it'll allow you to ignore certain things. But in general, you're going to have a really hard time scaling your shields into late game unless you have some certain Warframe ability synergy with a shield-based setup. And I think that's a big problem, because on average, if you have the average amount of shields, the average amount of armor, etc., the defenses should be somewhat similar. And I'm 100% okay with the fact that Inaros and Hildren are very much pushed towards a specific style of defense. I'm fine with that. The only problem I have is when Vauban is pushed towards a specific type of defense. That makes no sense. Why do I have to build life and armor? Well, it's because you have an Umbral mods exist, and you have all these other mods that scale with life and armor, and you have all these arcanes that also scale with life and armor in a much better and easier way than shield mods do. So in general, there's just really almost no reason to go something other than life and armor. You have a lot of added headaches with quick thinking over top of the problems you already had with life armor. And then shields have some very potent weaknesses that life armor don't, and even energy armor don't. So this is to the point of the video where I want to kind of talk about how I would change things. So the first way I would change things is, let's talk about quick thinking. I would straight up remove the flinching that quick thinking gets. I really don't like the added flinch. I don't think CCing players as an added mechanic is fun, and I think fun should be the core design element of any game. I really don't think CC is the way to go as an added defensive measure. If I choose to be defensive in a specific way, it shouldn't have the added negative of CCing me. That doesn't make any sense. I chose to be defensive. I took additional mods over a different style just to have this very specific style of defense. Why am I being punished for that? Like, it's okay to have, you know, hey, life armor has a weakness of this, but a CC, that makes no sense to me. In addition to that, I think that the magnetic status effect should be nerfed in its energy draw. I don't think it makes sense to have 50 energy be a draw. 50 over 4 seconds is going to end up being 200 energy. This isn't mitigated or interacted with adaptation or armor or energy conversion from your quick thinking. It doesn't matter. It just takes 50 energy from you. Could you imagine if a heat proc just took half of Inaros' health? It just makes no sense. Right? So I think 50 is way too high a number. I think it should be reduced to maybe 20. Maybe 25 at the most. I think that and the flinching would really help quick thinking builds come into popularity a bit more, because there are certain frames that, you know, synergize with it better than others. And then for life armor, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I don't think anything should really be changed or buffed, or like, they're fine, honestly, in pretty much every way. Life armor is really good right now. For shields, for one thing, I think that these evasive mods from Heart of Demos should be changed to be shield based, and I know that's never going to happen, but I really think evasion is a much cooler stat that would go with shields in a synergistic way, and it would be something that we could have instead of armor. We could have evasion. That's always been the classic RPG, like, do you dodge or do you block, you know? Like, it's really cool, and I think it would synergize in a really meaningful way that players can connect with, because they've seen it before. It's somewhat expected, and I really think evasion could be a very cool mechanic for Warframe. So I think they should change those to be shield based. I think they should get rid of the 25% damage reduction across the board for shield damage. I don't think it makes sense. I don't think it flows with the way the game works. I think either they should change it to be that percentage is based on the base armor that the frame gets, or that they should have some sort of alternative measure to scale your shields. Maybe a multiplicative measure, or just buff all of the shield things so that you get a really big, nice, hefty pool, and you don't ever focus on damage reductions. You just, because you don't have that layer from armor, you just have a lot more life. You just end up with like 4 times as much health, or not health, but shields. You guys get what I mean. I think that would be a really interesting way to scale it, so that you would just see these massive shield pools compared to a life setup. I think that would be really fun and interesting, and it would make players feel special in a lot of really cool ways. And that 25%, I hate dwelling on it, but it's just so arbitrary and so like forced in that I think they really need to change it back away from that and do something else. Finally, the thing that I would change about shields is that the toxin damage should be treated exactly like slash damage. The toxin damage should never penetrate your shields. Only the status effect of poison should penetrate it. That would allow us to take an arcane if we really, really wanted to be careful about poison status effects, and then we would also not randomly get one shot by things, and it would also allow us to scale with adaptation in a way that we couldn't do before, because we would be able to scale up that toxin resistance over being hit, and eventually when we got hit by the proc, it would allow us to minimize that a little bit and give us some time and not just get one shot every time there was a toxic aura up on an infested map above the level of 50. And I know, guys, that I've probably missed a lot of very small, minute things here and there, and this mod interacts with this, but I mean, you guys get the sentiment of what I'm talking about here. We can very clearly see the tiers of defenses in the game, and I think on an average frame, it should really just be a coin toss or how you want to play, as opposed to being forced to say, hey, do I scale insanely well with an energy setup or insanely well with a shield setup? If no, then I just go life armor. I don't think that's a healthy place to put the game. I don't like it. I think it should very much be a choice that you get to make. But I think that's going to do it for the video. I'm going to go ahead and let the rest of the Rapapolist kill happen. But if you guys, like always, have any questions, comments, concerns, if I missed anything or misrepresented anything, let me know in the comment section below. I'm still learning too. And that's going to be it for my voice. Thanks for watching.